Hello and welcome to the DoneJS contributors meeting. Today is Friday, May 19th, 2017. My name is Chasen, and we have most of the people here are on the core team. Want to say hello? Unmute yourself. Hey.
Hello, I'm Kevin. Also,
Matthew. Hello to you.
And Sheriff, say hello.
Hello, Sheriff.
Hey, good to see you guys. Okay, let's go through statuses, what we worked on in the previous week and what we're working on next week. I'll start. This past week did a lot of helping of people with various things and submitted some PRs to clean up some of the guides and stuff like that. But the majority of my time was spent working on the SitePoint article. I finished my rough draft, just kind of in the editing stage now. We're kind of scheduled to publish it either at the end of this month or at the beginning of next month. So just wrapping that up. So that's what I'll continue working on next week. And then I'll be updating the DoneJS 1.0 like chat guide presentation and working on the migration blog post that I started many weeks ago, but haven't had the time to finish. So that's me. Kevin Dillon, you want to give your status?
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of work on pointer events going in through right-click on func-unit and syn, of course. The changes are actually in syn, and so that stuff is in, but it has not been released yet. So we'll probably be releasing that, I'd say, next week. There's a couple other things that I want to get in there. There are some other changes that will come down with that, which is the QUnit 2 stuff, and that does break some workflows. So it breaks some of our workflows here at the MathWorks. So we're trying to come up with a good way to work around that, either to have like a little translation layer or something so that people can get the new version of func-unit without having to change all of their tests, at least not initially. I mean, ideally we want people to use the QUnit 2 workflows, but this gives them a little bit of wiggle room. So we're working on that to try and ease that for some people. So this is mostly if you're working in child windows. There's a previously supported workflow that is no longer supported, and so we're trying to address that before releasing that particular upgrade.
Cool, sounds good. Kevin Phillips.
yeah. So this week I've been working on Can Reflect, trying to get Can Stash and Can Stash bindings working with Can Reflect. We'll maybe talk about later what that actually means. And then I did a presentation in Indianapolis at indy.js, where I went through the CanJS chat guide, and they actually streamed the meetup to YouTube. So there's a link in the contributors meeting notes if you want to watch me go through the chat guide and say a bunch of times. And then yesterday I published Testy 0.5.1, which has some changes that I had nothing to do with, but that Chris put in to prevent browser caching. So if you're running your tests and you're also running your tests separately using like the coverage options, sometimes if the browser caches your test files, then the coverage doesn't get reported correctly. So hopefully this fixes that. It's a long-standing issue that was open to prevent caching, so hopefully that fixes stuff for people. Next week, I'm going to continue working on Can Reflect. And that's it for me.
Cool, sounds good. Matthew.
Hey everyone, I'm going to share my screen just so I can show off the feature that I added. I'm working on streaming. This is the Epic for those that are curious. It's DoneJS 834. So I'm adding different streaming capabilities to DoneJS, adding HTTP2 support to DoneJS. This week I did add HTTP2 support to DoneServe. It's not released yet, and it probably won't be for a little while. But I might be able to get like a beta out for people that want to play with that. So I've also been updating DoneSSR. One thing that will be available shortly. Again, this is not released, but I added support for setting the navigator.language. So the browser will send an accept language header when there's some language specific needs. So now DoneJS will set navigator.language in your code so that you can kind of use that to do internationalization on the server side and get the correctly rendered thing out to your user. So I had support for that. The big thing I'm working on is adding like different rendering options to DoneSSR. So there'll be different like rendering strategies, and I'll probably go more into that in a future one of these things. But so yeah, lots of streaming things for me.
Cool. Sounds great. Sheriff, do you want to give your status?
Okay, for me, I didn't do much of things, but now I have stable internet connections. So for the
That's
future,
good.
I hope it will be the same for all time, and hopefully I will do much contributions for the future. Okay. That's
Cool.
it.
Sounds
Thank
good. Glad to have you here. Okay, let's go to topics. I think, Kevin Phillips, you were the only one who posted anything. Do you want to give us a little intro to Can Reflect?
Yeah. So we've been talking about Can Reflect a lot, but I don't know if we've actually shown any of the code and kind of explained what it is. Justin talked about it a little bit a long time ago on his, like, I don't remember, he called it Built to Last video or whatever. Let me share my screen and I'll go through a couple quick things, and then Brad, if you've got stuff to add, you've been working on this a lot more than I have, so you can add whatever I miss. All right. Can you guys see my screen? That's the what I wanted to do.
Yep. Oh.
Took it away. How about now?
Awesome.
Okay, cool. So Can Reflect, it says operate on unknown data types. So what exactly does that mean? So it's called Can Reflect because it's actually based on a new browser API called Reflect that's in ES6. I got a quick example here that kind of shows what that does. So in this example, we got a regular object and then a map, which is a ES6 map, not a Can map. Yeah.
Can you increase the file size a little bit, possibly? There you go. Font size, not file size. There you go.
Figured that's what you meant. All right. So we got an object and then an ES6 map. This is not a CanJS map. It's ES6. There's nothing being loaded. So these are very similar, but you have to set properties and read properties differently. So for the regular object, you can set property like this, and then for the map, you can use set. So what Reflect is trying to do is trying to standardize APIs depending on, or no matter what type of object you have. So if we do this in the Reflect way, then instead of setting the properties the other way, you'll do reflect.set and then pass it whatever the object is, and this API is totally the same. It's consistent between the two. And then the same thing for getting properties, you can call reflect.get. And you can see that that works the same way for both of them. So that's what the Reflect API is trying to do, is standardize the the operations that you need to do on objects in JavaScript. So Can Reflect, we're trying to do that for objects in Can. So anything that we have in CanJS, any operations that we need to do on anything, whether it's a map or a list or a defined map or a simple map or a promise or a Kefir stream or whatever type of object you have, we want to be able to use the same APIs under the hood. So for like get and set properties similar to the regular Reflect, we have those things. We have get key value, set key value. And then anything that we need to do. So for observing values, we've got on key value, off key value for setting up listeners for when values change and that kind of stuff. All right, so the changes that actually need to be made are basically anywhere we were checking for what type of object it was and doing some sort of manipulation, doing any of these things, we need to change those to use Reflect. So I'll give one example here. So this is in Can Stash. we used to check like, is this thing a compute? And if it is, then I need to actually call the compute to get the actual value. Make this a little bigger. Now I lost where I was. Yeah, so you see this all over the place. If it's a compute, then we have to do some crazy stuff. Whereas now it's just using can-reflect to get values and set values. Another thing is that for all of our types, we need to set them up so that they work correctly with can-reflect. So for like on-key value and off-key value, we set these symbols that we have, set them on the prototype for whatever our object is, so that they work correctly, and then also set all of these things that are used internally by can-reflect. Cool. So that is what can-reflect is. Brad, is there anything you want to add for the work that you've been doing, or is that?
Not really much to add, other than the fact that I've generally been working with everything on the model layer and also the infrastructure, so observable and computes and map types, so regular map and define map, just to make sure that they're essentially like trying to use the interface as much as possible. And my goal is essentially to especially remove interoperability problems. So definitely, like what I've seen a lot in working on client projects is if you are attempting to move from a can map based model layer to a define map based model and view model layer, you can't do it partially. You really have to sort of go in and loop everything through at once. And you're going to run across a lot of problems along the way until you actually get everything converted over, because there are just some particular ways in which can maps and define maps don't interrupt properly. With can reflect, we should be able to avoid problems like that, so that each one can sort of define when it needs a certain thing out of the other one, rather than they're depending on certain keyed functions like get or adder, or having set with like an object. This should be able to just sort of like go away as sort of like an abstraction that we put on top of how these things operate in under the hood. And that should allow you to like partially update if you want to use define map in places and can map in places. That should be fine. But I have some other bugs that I'm going to see if the can reflects port will resolve without me having to do any actual work on making them work. If they do, great. If not, I'll keep tweaking it until it does.
Awesome, thanks. That actually reminded me of a couple. I missed a couple of the reasons why we're doing this. So one is interop with new types. So we should be able to have Kepler streams, or if you want RxJS streams or things like that, you should be able to use those much easier. We should be able to add interop with whatever kind of types we want, just by creating a layer that uses can reflect on top of them. And then the other thing is, let me share my screen again, is that we can, under the hood, we can use faster types of observables. So in can stash, we used to use computes everywhere internally, and now with the can reflect changes, we actually changed this to use can observation, because it's actually a lot quicker. I think Justin did some performance testing on this and found that it's like 30% faster or something to use observations instead of computes inside of can stash. So those are kind of two of the big reasons why we're doing this.
Computes use observations under the hood anyway, but it's really like cutting out the middleman. And
yeah,
that's
exactly.
something that if you're going to write like model layer plugins or whatever for CanJS, you can support both. You can actually like let people set computes for observation, but use observations yourself, and have one unified way of actually reading off of each one.
I guess
awesome.
the other big reason for this is that we have like several different observable types in CanJS. I don't think you all mentioned that, but there's can maps, which are kind of deprecated in a way. Can define maps. We have can simple map, I think, or something like that. There's another map that's kind of like the default map. So we have all these different maps. And just for a little bit of background, the way that we did this before is in CanUtil, there was like a CanUtil types, and CanUtil types had a function called isMapLike. So in order to know if something was like a map, any library that needed to like say, hey, I'm a map, would override this function and kind of like, you know, check to see if it's the right type, and it would return true anyways. That was kind of not the best possible way to do it. This is much cooler. So yeah, let's do it this way.
Yeah. So we had places where it was like checking if your property has an attr method, and if it does, call that, and then checking if it has a get, and if it does, call that, and if it doesn't, then trying to access it like a regular object, and all these kinds of if statements all over the place that we're trying.
DoneSSR has this exact thing that you're talking about. So yeah, it'd be great to use that there as well.
Cool. So it seems really cool that there's like a future minor release of CAN that has all of the CAN reflect stuff. Is just going to be faster, especially for templating stuff. And then anyone who's migrating, who wants to make the migration or start using CAN define in places where they've been using CAN map, they should be able to do that kind of progressively instead of try and convert all the way over. And then building anything that works with any of our observable types is going to be a hell of a lot easier because of this. So that's awesome. Does anyone have any other questions or comments or anything they wanted to talk about on this subject? Nope. Cool. Did anyone have any other topics? I didn't see any in the forums, but did anyone have anything they wanted to add or show off?
Yeah, well, more of a question. Didn't want to interrupt Kevin Dillon when he was giving his status, but he mentioned QUnit 2. I've been kind of following that sort of, and it kind of trailed off. I want to talk a little bit. You kind of alluded to it, but what are the problems there that you all are experiencing? Do you mind talking more about that if you know?
I don't have the specifics of it. It's being worked on by another team member, but I can give you sort of a general overview. Let me just bring up a reference here, because.
So I know we created there's a new version of Steel QUnit that supports QUnit 2 that someone on your team worked on, and I knew they were going to use that in the FunkUnit tests. And I thought they got that working, but it sounds like maybe when you used it in a real app, it stopped working or something.
Do you remember who that was? Which team member that was?
I can look it up real quick.
Okay.
Well, you might not be on your team actually. The person who did it is Shaheen Umar. Does that sound familiar?
That does not.
Okay. Well, maybe he's not on your team actually. I mean, there's a few. I know there's several people that have been commenting on this issue and working on it, but maybe I assume they all work for Math Labs. Maybe not. MathWorks.
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, never mind.
All right. So specifically, the problem was, unfortunately, I can't seem to find it in here. Are
you looking for the Are you looking for the FunkUnit issue that mentions QUnit, or? So
there's an issue with so we want to upgrade FunkUnit to use a newer version of QUnit, and I believe that it's in QUnit 1.23 that that a particular workflow is deprecated, where if you're opening a new window in module start, I want to say that's what it is. It no longer works, and I was looking for the actual error message, but I can't seem to find it. So
that's okay. We can talk about it later. I just thought I'd pick your brain if you happen to know more about that. Didn't mean to put you on the spot like this.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, it's in the issue in Func Unit 155.
Okay.
They're talking about the module start.
Right. So QUnit module start. So in that body, we're doing QUnit.stop, and that fails with an error. But the error is what? Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't find the actual text of the error.
Okay.
But I'm sure I can dig into it and find it. But
That's okay. We'll see where it goes there. It's going to be cool to have that in Func Unit, though.
okay.
Cool. Anything else that anyone wanted to bring up before we go? Nope. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining. Everyone who's watching on the live stream, thanks for watching, and see you guys next week.